So let's get started with this stream. First of all, we're going to do a short introduction. Those of you that were here last week know who I am, but there's a few people that were not. Welcome, newbies. So we're going to talk about who I am real quick. We're going to talk about development, womb to tomb. We're going to talk about motivation, emotion, stress, and personality. And of course, we're going to take a little time for questions. If you have any questions that come up, feel free to put them in the question box here, the ask a question box. Love to have them. I will get to them as quickly as I can. We do have a lot of material to cover though, so let's get this show on the road. So first of all, who is this guy anyway? Me. My name is Darren Rudman. I teach AP World and European History, and I teach psychology too. I have a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in secondary education, and I've been teaching for several years now. I teach here in Henderson, Nevada, which is near Vegas, but not quite the same. So why are we here? Well, we're going to be reviewing, that's from the old slide, oops, development and motivation, emotion, and stress. Sorry about that. I meant to edit that. Oops. So let's talk about development. 7 ages of man. Man being person, not just men, of course. Tigas, welcome back. Akshita, welcome back. So we have sleepy, happy, dopey, bashful, doc, sneezy, and grumpy. If those names sound familiar, that's the 7 dwarves. Well, the 7 dwarves kind of seem like they could be the various states of human development. Babies sleep a lot. Kids often are pretty happy. Young adolescents tend to feel kind of lost. Middle adolescents, like many of you, well, puberty stinks, man. It's embarrassing. You get into your full livelihood as doc, getting older, you're sneezy, and by the time you're yelling at kids to get off my lawn, you're grumpy. So developmental psychology is a branch of psychology that studies physical, cognitive, and social change from womb to tomb. Literally from the time the sperm hits the egg to death. So it's a very broad topic and it covers a lot of ground. So sometimes, of course, we just have to mention the big names. And if we're going to do that, we got to start with Jean Piaget. But Jean Piaget, of course, is the great big voodoo daddy of all things developmental psychology. Not because he was the first to propose the idea of developmental psychology per se, or that he had the first theory of development, but because we lean on him pretty heavily when it comes to the actual mastery, the actual area of psychology we call developmental psychology. So he did propose stages of cognitive development, which were not sex focused. Freud, excuse me. And he proposed the concept of schemas. Now, schemas are mental molds in which we pour our experiences. That's a direct quote. And it's kind of a nifty idea. It is how we kind of frame our world. We take our experiences and we plop them into our schemas, and that's how we better understand our world. And he considers schemas to be the most basic unit of our intellect. So how do schemas change? Well, there's a few ways that we do it. Assimilation, which is absorbing new information into your existing schemas, so taking what you have and growing it. And accommodation, which is adjusting old schemas or developing brand new ones that fit with newly available information. We talked a little bit last time when we were talking about cognition, how do I have example of what Tigas? I'm sorry. So when we're talking about assimilation, the idea that thank you, them. Gotcha. So when we talk about assimilation and accommodation, we do talk about understanding the molds that we've got versus the molds that we're going to get. So one example of assimilation is going to be the idea that your house cat and a tiger are both felines, and understanding that they fit into the same feline schema, even though they're not the same animal. Accommodation is going to be understanding that not all four-legged furry things are doggies. sometimes they're kitties, sometimes they're llamas. You understand? So that is one way to kind of look at assimilation versus accommodation. We'll discuss that more when we get to the questions section. So what is the force behind cognitive development? That is one of the central questions of all things developmental. And according to Piaget, it is our continued biological development as we continue to interact with and experience our environments. So what helps us develop our cognition, our understanding of the world around us, is the force of our bodies developing and the life we experience interacting with each other and our mind, our cognition, and what comes out of that, right? So basically, if you think about it, our cognitive development is shaped by the mistakes we make. We make mistakes, we learn from them, we grow in cognitive development. It's kind of a nifty thing. So let's talk about the stages for Piaget, and we will have lots of stages available to us as we go on. All of these slides, from what I understand, will be available to view at in the future. You're welcome to take a screenshot of this if you're so inclined. It's fine by me. Just to understand that my beautiful face will be on it. So hey, so we have 4 stages when we talk about Piaget, about cognitive development. First one, of course, is sensory motor. It's experiencing the world through the senses. And that's from birth to 2 years old. And if you think about it, babies until they're 2 years old, they're tasting, they're touching, they're looking at everything. And so they experience the world through their senses. And what happens during this stage? We develop object permanence and we develop stranger danger. Babies learn that strangers are not necessarily going to be the safest thing in the world. Pre-operational stage, that's representing things with words and images, and also developing intuitive reasoning, is 2 years to 6 and 7 years. That's where we start developing pretend play, egocentrism. And if you've ever met a 2-year-old, a kid between 2 and 7 years old, they're some of the most egocentric individuals you'll ever meet in your life. And it's also language developments, where we start really developing language. Concrete operational stage is logical thinking about concrete events, understanding concrete analogies, and that's 7 years to 11 years. This is where kids start being able to tell jokes effectively. This is where kids start understanding broader concepts, so conservation of material and mass and volume, and also mathematical transformation. You'll notice that from 7 years to 11 years, they start developing. This is the same time where kids start learning the basics of mathematics. Excuse me. And that leaves the formal operational stage. That's abstract reasoning, okay? That's 12 years through adulthood, through the rest of your life. So that's when we start reasoning in the abstract instead of just the concrete. So we start understanding abstract logic, understanding the idea that, a rule is there to be followed, but some situations can change how that rule is followed. It's mature moral reasoning. So let's talk about conservation. That's definitely a vocab word in AP Psych. And so the definition is that it's the concept that length, volume, and number remain the same despite changes in the forms, position of the object. So the pennies on the left and the pennies on the right are conserved, even though how the number looks change. The length of the sticks is conserved, even though the position of them is different. And up until you've developed conservation of mass, volume, length, etc., you don't necessarily understand that. And again, conservation is at our concrete operational stage, okay? Again, conservation happens at our concrete operational stage between 7 and 11 years, get thereabouts. And volume. So 2 bricks of clay of the same size are still the same volume when one is a ball and the other's flattened out. It's still the same volume as of clay. So social development, according to Mary Ainsworth and her theories of attachment, are when we develop emotional and social ties with another person. And this is how we understand being securely or insecurely attached. Okay, Mary Ainsworth is who we owe that concept. So in in Dr. Ainsworth's theory, and really we've seen this work very functionally in developmental psychology, securely and insecurely attached children become securely and insecurely attached adults. And you can see that there's two very different types of personalities that develop between the securely and insecurely attached. So securely attached children deal with stress better, they're more independent, they're willing to try new things, they're better problem solvers, they form better and more functional relationships with others, and they're generally more happy as people. Excuse me. Insecurely attached children, on the other hand, they're reluctant to interact with others. They tend to avoid other people. They have poor stress management. They more readily show anger, anxiety, or fear. And generally speaking, they're less happy in their lives. Obviously, these are very broad terms, but you can, if you think about it, you know people that probably fit into each of these molds. Now, if we're talking development, we still have to talk about Freud because he did have a theory on development. He talked about personality development, understanding who we are as people. And his theory was called the stages of psychosexual development. According to Freud, the childhood stages of development are during which it's pleasure-seeking. Yeah, it was crazy. Absolutely. I love how you guys are talking in concert. That's fantastic. So let's talk about psychosexual development. Let's make it as easy as possible. So these are the childhood stages of development during which the id's pleasure-seeking energies, that little devil on your shoulder, focuses on distinct erogenous zones, the areas of the body that are most centered in our focus, right? And so personality develops as a result of unresolved conflicts during the various stages. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about the id, the ego, and the superego, you can think of it as a Tom and Jerry cartoon, okay? You guys remember Tom and Jerry, the cat and the mouse? So when the cat, Tom, is going to, smack Jerry with something, right? He can get a little devil on his shoulder and a little angel on his shoulder. The devil is like his id. He wants the fun and he wants it now. Do it, Tom, smack him. The angel is Tom's superego. He says, no, that's the wrong thing to do. Don't do it. And Tom is there, the ego, just trying to figure it all out and decide what to do. No need to panic, I promise, Akshita. So there are 5 stages of psychosexual development according to Freud, and they are as follows. The devil doesn't always win Tigist, but he or she tends to be a little bit more fun. So the oral stage is birth to 18 months. And we see that our pleasure centers are the mouth, and they focus on sucking. Yeah, for Tom, that's true, Tigist. Usually the devil wins. So the pleasure centers are on the mouth, the oral stage, mouth. So we're talking about sucking, biting, and chewing. And if you think of a child from birth to 18 months, they put everything in their mouths. The anal stage is from 18 to 36 months. So a year and a half to 3 years old, that same time period where we're potty training. And so the pleasure is focused on bowel and bladder elimination. And the term pleasure is kind of a general term for Freud. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's, oh, happy pleasure. It is the focus of our arousal, right? Physical arousal. Exactly, Anika, the ego decides. So the pleasure focuses on bowel and bladder elimination, and this is coping with demands for control over bodily function, control over life. Phallic stage is 3 to 6 years. Its pleasure focuses on the genitals. This is where we see our Oedipus and Electra complexes developing. Now, if you think about it, if you know any 3 to 6-year-olds, you'll know that they really don't take their hands out of their pants for that first 3 years. And as silly as that, yeah, the story of Oedipus, it is. And so that, focus is on the genitals and discovering them. That family's tree needed some weeding, is what it needed. Latency is that 6 to 12 years-ish stage. It's dormant sexual feelings. From 6 to 12 years, you don't really have sexual feelings. You don't know what sexual pleasure is. And after, 12-ish, 13 years is the genital stage, puberty and on. That's maturation of sexual interest. That's when you start getting interested in the opposite or same sex, depending on your flavor. Now, personality development, not Freud, you're welcome, is when we start talking about also temperament. So temperament is how emotionally reactive and intensely emotional you happen to be. Okay, so that's a part of personality. So if you have an easy temperament, you're adaptable, you have a positive mood overall, and you have regular habits, you tend to be pretty go with the flow. If you're slow to warm up, you're low activity, somewhat slow to adapt to things, but you can still adapt eventually. And you tend to withdraw from new situations. You don't like to deal with them. They're tough. Difficult temperament is when you have intense emotions. You're irritable. You cry frequently. That explosive personality. That difficult temperament, right? Average temperament is when we're unable to classify a child or an adult. Me, I like that, Akshita. And that tends to be 1/3 of all children. Okay, 1/3 of all children fall into that average range. You can't easily classify them as one of the first three, so they could be a little bit of everything. Depends on how they're doing and how good of a nap they got earlier. So Erikson. Okay, Erikson is one of our Freud defiers, and he developed a set of stages of psychosocial development. Okay, instead of psychosexual development, psychosocial. So understanding development as in the mind and socially, and so it's a much longer list. So I put it in 2 parts. So we have our infancy stage, that's birth to 1 year. It's where we conquer the issue of trust versus mistrust, learning to trust or not. Toddlerhood, 1 to 2 years, is autonomy versus shame, being self-reliant or feeling shame in that. Preschoolers are 3 to 5 years. Initiative, as in taking the initiative to get things done, or guilt, feeling guilty for trying to do those things. Elementary school is 6 years through puberty. Is competence versus inferiority. Are you competent in the things you try to do, or do you feel inferior every time you give it a shot? Adolescence is your teens into your 20s. That's identity versus role confusion. Who you are. Do you develop a positive identity and understanding of who you are, or do you feel confused in where you fit into the world? Young adulthood is your 20s to 40s. That's actually where I fall in. I'm 37. That's early 40s. Is intimacy versus isolation. Figuring out if you're going to pair up with someone and then develop a family, or are you going to stay alone? Middle adulthood, 40s to 60s. That's where a lot of my parents are just past this middle adulthood phase, but I have a lot of friends in this phase. Is generativity versus stagnation. Are you generating something new? Are you building on life, or are you stagnating? Are you just kind of turning into a pond? So that's a great question, Tigis. I'm going to hold on to that, and we're going to answer it during the question section. Thank you so much for asking it. And late adulthood is your 60s to the grave. It's integrity versus despair. Are you leaving something behind for history to remember you by, or are you despairing over the life you could have lived? So when we talk about development, we've got to talk about parenting styles. And why do we talk about parenting styles? Because that's part of development. Now, all of you may think that you have very authoritarian parents, but believe it or not, you might not, no matter how strict they happen to be. So there are 4 types of parenting styles in Erikson and a few others models. First is the authoritarian parent. These are parents that impose rules and expect obedience. Don't interrupt. Do as I say, not as I do. Whoosh, they crack the whip. Permissive parents, on the other hand, and all of you know someone who has permissive parents, they submit to the children's desires. They use little to no punishment. The child runs the household. These are the kids whose parents never tell them no and get everything they want. They tend to be spoiled brats, no matter how old they are. Authoritative versus democratic parents, yeah, I know, and this is the best type of parenting for a child. They are demanding and responsive. So they have demands, they have restrictions, they have rules, but they will listen when it comes to questions about those. They set rules, but explain the reasons and encourage open discussion. Half of high school, no joke. Anika, you're very fortunate. Rejecting and neglecting parents, on the other hand, are completely uninvolved. They're disengaged. They expect little and invest less. And the kids of rejecting and neglecting parents tend to end up on the wrong side of things. Drugs, alcohol, the law, you name it. They just do whatever. So Adolescence is one of these major stages of development. You know, you folks. That's why we want, of course, why we wanted to bring it up. Besides the fact that, you know, we do love you here at Fiveable, and we do appreciate you being involved. It's part of the, you know, development of the human being. It's the period of life between childhood and adulthood. Is that middle period. It is feeling in between. And if you feel like you're sandwiched in between the little kids and the adults, there's a reason you are. Now, it begins with puberty. Earlier in females, 11 years-ish, and later in males, 13 years-ish. And that may not seem like a lot of time, but it makes all the difference. Females see an increase in height earlier than males, but males grow for longer. We also see the development of primary and secondary sex characteristics. Primary are going to be the ovaries, the testes, things like that, things that actually make the babies. Secondary are going to be the stuff you can actually see. That's why they say girls mature faster. Exactly. They start earlier. But also, when you talk about maturing faster, and actually I'm going to put that in the question section because that's a great statement that we're going to talk about in a second. Secondary characteristics are going to be breast, hips, voice, body hair, things like that. Things you can see that aren't directly involved with making the next generation. Moving right along. So, stages of moral development according to Kohlberg, because everybody that weighed in on development has their stages, right? And so, according to Kohlberg, there were 6 stages, but 3 levels, okay? So each stage, every 2 stages was a level of morality that you've moved up. So in pre-conventional morality, that first level, it's from birth up to age 9. The first 2 stages are avoiding punishment and gaining reward. That's the goal. In the second level of morality, conventional morality, that normal type, right? The society's instilled on you morality time period is from 9 years through adolescence. You want to be a good boy or girl, and you want to avoid being censored. Okay, you want to avoid censure. Post-conventional morality, on the other hand, is that last level of morality, and not everybody reaches it, honestly. It's adolescence to death. And it is where you're looking to maintain the community, and you still have that individual conscience that helps you be a better person, right? So, adulthood and aging. We can't talk about development if we don't talk about the end side. We've already talked about the beginning. We talked about the middle with folks like you, adolescents. Now we got to talk about the tail end of it. So, life expectancy in the USA as of 2019 was 78.93 years on average. Okay, and that's between males and females together. So that's solid. Okay, we're up there as far as the world goes. We're not the highest, but we're up there. 76 in males, 81s in females. Yeah, it's a long time. And women tend to outlive men on average and outnumber them at most age ranges. And that's been that way for a long time now. Now, as we age, things change for us. So as we grow up, our senses develop, our cognition develops, our sociability develops, our morals develop, everything grows. But at some point or another, we grow into the person that we are, and eventually things start to deteriorate or at least change as we age. So as we age, we see a gradual decline in sensory sensitivity. Okay, so that's why elderly people often need vision corrections of some sort, be it reading glasses or actual glasses. Yes, censure is punishment. That's exactly correct, Anika. Thank you so much. Vision correction, and also some need hearing aids. So the senses and touch and taste, those all start to dull some. By age 70, motor abilities are also in decline. The 7-year-old is no match for a 20-year-old individual when it comes to a foot race. Yeah, taste too. Now, that doesn't mean you can't taste things at all. It just means that it takes bigger flavors to taste things. Fatal accidents also increase around the 70-year-old age as the body struggles more to repair itself. So as accidents happen, they can be more fatal because the body can't necessarily recover. So the elderly are more susceptible to life-threatening ailments such as cancer, pneumonia, and less often suffer short-term ailments such as suffer short-term, and more often suffer short-term ailments such as the flu and cold viruses. And now we're seeing this in real time in the news media these days with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? I've fallen and I can't get up. That's accurate. As much as that's a meme, it's true. There are people that in their early years that will fall and break something so they cannot get up. And you'll notice with the COVID-19 pandemic, just as a quick aside, but completely related, the majority of the people that have passed away, which of course is unfortunate, are the elderly or impaired health, right? So they are already less able to defend their bodies from on a biological level, and yet they get a disease. Precisely, thank you. So as we age, dementia becomes a thing. Now, does that mean every old person has dementia? Not at all, okay? Not even close. But dementia does become a thing as we age. And so with increasing age, the risk of dementia also increases. And dementia, and I want to emphasize this, is not a normal part of growing old, okay? It is more common in the elderly, but it is not a normal thing. Not everyone is going to have some sort of dementia. Now, I don't know if you can see from the picture, but there are frontal peripheral, Lewy body, vascular, and Alzheimer's dementia. That's the four main types. Alzheimer's, of course, is the most commonly seen form, and it's the one we know most about, Alzheimer's type dementia. Once called Alzheimer's disease dementia. So we'll talk about that. Dementia can be caused by stroke, alcoholism, brain tumors, or deterioration of brain tissue. And so what dementia is, just to answer that question real quick, thank you so much. Dementia is a deterioration of brain function and cognitive function, usually, actually always due to some sort of lessening of actual brain tissue function. Okay, so that's what dementia is as far as that sort of thing goes. So risk of dementia increases with age, deterioration of neurons, and a lot of Alzheimer's, especially dementia, we've seen is the result of the deterioration in neurons that produce acetylcholine, ACH. So if you see ACH written like this, capital A, capital C, lowercase h, that's acetylcholine, okay? Alzheimer's dementia, it affects about 3% of the world by age 75. We will talk about that, Akshita. Thank you so much for asking. So, and there are hereditary links shown by genetic defects on the 19th and 21st chromosomes that may be linked to developing Alzheimer's. That does not mean that everyone with a genetic defect on the 19th and 21st chromosome is going to get Alzheimer's, but the people with them seem to be getting it more often. Now, aging and cognition and intelligence. So to start answering Akshita's question, but we're going to answer it in full in a little bit. Recognition memory, okay, does not decline with age. So being able to recognize people in normal circumstances, not in dementia, but in normal circumstances, doesn't decline. And material that's meaningful is recalled better than meaningless material. So trying to remember meaningless things is harder to do as you get older, but things that matter, like your grandkids, it's right there. The same is true for perspective memory, like remembering to do things. Important things will stay with you, not important things won't, which is why a lot of times your grandparents may say, what was I going to do? It must not have been important because they don't remember it. Well, that's because, well, it's kind of true. If they don't remember it, there's a good chance it's not important. Genetics does play a role, yes. Genetics does play a role, and we'll talk about that when we answer some questions, okay? Longitudinal studies, these are studies over long periods of time, suggest that intelligence remains relative as we age. It's believed today that fluid intelligence, which is the ability to reason speedily, declines with age. So how fast you reason with things declines, but crystallized intelligence, the actual thing that is intelligence, that the in and outs of your IQ, right? That accumulated knowledge and skill does not decline with age. You get people that are in their 80s that can still do amazing things skill-wise. Intelligence also comes up. Dana, thank you so much for asking. Dana. Intelligence comes up also in cognition, and it comes up. Yeah, it comes in a few other places. Feel free to consult the course and exam description, which you can find in PDF form online. But yes, Unit 5 does have intelligence as well. So moving on. Now, a number of cognitive abilities do decline with age. However, vocabulary and general knowledge increase with age. And that could be why grandma keeps whooping all of you in Scrabble. Why? Because her vocabulary and her general knowledge increases as she continues to get older. And that's the case. Now, verbal intelligence scores hold steady with age, while nonverbal intelligence scores seem to decline. And these are all just factors that we see in general. There are, of course, exceptions. You can get these like whip smart individuals in their late 90s that seem to have absolutely no decline. That happens, but they're not part of the norm. And now for a tricky subject. Let's talk about death and dying, because this is part of development. There is no normal reaction or series of grief stages after the death of the loved one. And I really want to emphasize that. There is no normal reaction or series of grief stages after the death of a loved one. Everyone experiences grief differently, at different rates, on different stages, and it's not linear. Sometimes you'll, go a couple of stages, skip to the end, and then go and double back, right? Grief is more sudden if the death occurs unexpectedly. And people who reach a sense of integrity in life, in Erikson's terms, see life as meaningful and worthwhile. And those people that have reached that feeling tend to leave behind less grief or less extreme grief. You still miss them. You're still sad to see them gone. But it's less extreme because they've had a meaningful and worthwhile life, right? So Kubler-Ross, which is a set of psychologists, developed a 5-stage theory of the psychological process surrounding death. And keep in mind, these are not necessarily going to be linear, but you got to put numbers on things. So denial, it can't be true. Anger, why me? It's not fair. And that's having a loved one die, or in the case that you might be dying. Bargaining, I'll change everything. Just let me live, or let them live. Depression, I've lost everything. And acceptance, I know my time is near. Okay, and again, it's not linear. You're not necessarily just going to go boom, 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 and be done. Moving right along. Let's take a breath. Okay, I know we've just covered a lot of material. That's half of the material for the evening. So let's get some questions answered. A bunch of you have left some really great questions. So we did talk about assimilation and combination. Assimilation, of course, is understanding that, tigers fit into the feline model. Where a combination is that not all four-legged things are going to be, not all four-legged creatures are cats. Tegus, we will answer that momentarily. Great question, guys. So the issues as far as development goes are not strictly due to age stages, okay? Some people mature or go through the stages of development faster, some go slower. You have your late bloomers and your early bloomers and your normal bloomers, as it were. So Tegus asked this great question. Are the stages of development, any of the ones we discussed, just due to particular ages? No. Which is why A, we get ranges, and B, we understand that it's in general. So yes, they say girls mature faster because, first of all, girls start earlier. But secondly, girls get through to higher levels of maturity earlier than boys, which is why a lot of girls are more comfortable dating older guys, because maturity level, they're at the same level, even if age is different. That does not mean you should go dating a 28-year-old if you're 16. Don't do that. It's not going to go well. So, why isn't Alzheimer's or just dementia a normal part of age as you get older? So here's the thing. Cognitive decline does not mean dementia. Dementia is, again, a severe decline in cognitive ability due to loss of brain tissue, be it injury, stroke, deterioration, you name it. Okay. Cognitive decline from age is more gradual, it's not as severe, and you can have people up until the day they die that are still fully cognitively aware and, boom, 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 still snapping on all 8 cylinders. They just do things a little slower. Okay. So, yes, genetics is a big part of how Alzheimer's works out. We don't know everything about Alzheimer's yet. I don't know if we ever will, but we're trying in research. But we have found that there is a genetic component to it. And as far as the stages surrounding death, yes, it's actually both. It's if you are dying or a loved one is dying or has died. Those stages of grief, they apply to both. All right. So now that we've taken that, yes, Esha, it does. Let's continue on. Onward and upward. It's time to talk about motivation, emotion, and personality, okay? We're going onward. So motivation, and this is a vocab term for you, is a need or desire that energizes behavior. It drives it. It gets it going, and it directs it towards a goal. So motivation is what gets your behavior going and puts it in a particular direction. So there's 6 major theories of motivation. Obviously, there's lots of minor theories and lots of sub-theories and things like that. But we're only going to talk about the top 6, okay? Or if you sign 6. So there are 6 major theories: the instinct theory, drive reduction theory, arousal theory, incentive theory, cognitive theory, and of course the hierarchy of motives and needs. And if that sounds like, if that sounds familiar and almost Maslowian, there's a reason to talk about it. So instinct theory was one of the first motivational theories presented, and vocabularily speaking, instincts are complex behaviors that have fixed patterns throughout different species and are not learned. Okay, so instincts are something you're born with. So according to instinct theory, motivation is a result of biological genetic programming. We are all programmed with the same motivations, which is super biocentered and doesn't seem to work if you start thinking about it, right? But this theory came about right around the same time behaviorism was big, so that kind of makes sense. Now, drive reduction theory is where we start kind of exploring the world. So obviously instinct theory doesn't really work because we're not all the same. So what else have we got? Well, we have drive reduction theory, and drives are a physiological need that creates an aroused tension state. That's the drive. So you have a physiological need. You're hungry, you're thirsty, you're tired, you're aroused. That's the drive. And that motivates an organism like us to satisfy the need. And that reduces the drive. So if you're hungry, you eat. If you're thirsty, you drink. If you're running out of oxygen, you breathe. Things like that. This was first presented by Hull in 1951. So the goal is to reach homeostasis. Now, keep in mind, the only way a living being reaches homeostasis is death. That doesn't mean drive reduction theory is way out there. It's actually not. It makes a lot of sense, at least from a biological perspective. We do need to reduce our drives. It's not the only thing that motivates us, but we do need to reduce our drives from a biological standpoint, physiological standpoint. And so we try to reach homeostasis, and we try to get close to homeostasis, and we get as close as we can to homeostasis, but we never quite reach it because we always get hungry again. We always get thirsty again. We always get. That's the thing. The only way to get pure homeostasis is death. So reach towards homeostasis, don't reach it. So homeostasis is the maintenance of steady internal state, okay? It's the ability to maintain a constant internal environment in response to environmental changes. So it's always the goal, but only possible in death, like I just said. Now, that's still super biological. And biology is all well and good, but we know as students of psychology that there's more to it than just the biology. So let's talk about incentive theory. Well, incentives are an environmental stimulus that motivates behavior. And according to this view, people are pulled towards behaviors that offer positive incentives and pushed away from behaviors associated with negative incentives. Positive reinforcement, negative negative reinforcement or punishment, right? So that's incentive theory, and that makes a lot of sense too, the carrot or the stick, right? Now, how about this one? Token economy is a really good way to look at that. So Maslow's hierarchy of motivation and needs, that's our last one on our list. And in 1970, Abraham Maslow suggested that certain needs have priority over others. Physiological needs like breathing, thirst, hunger come before psychological needs such as achievement, self-esteem, and the need for recognition. And those needs drive our actions and motivate us. And obviously our goal is transcendence beyond self-actualization, being that better person, that best us, okay? It doesn't mean being better than anyone else. It means being better than we possibly could be, being our absolute best selves. So achievement motivation is a funny thing because it's the desire for significant accomplishment, okay? It's going for the gold medal. It's getting the blue ribbon. It's wanting to master things, people, or ideas. It is attaining a high standard. It motivates us because we want to achieve. So now that we've covered the theory, let's talk about what kinds of motivation there are in this world. There's two types when we talk basically. And the first one is intrinsic motivation. It's the desire to perform a behavior for its own sake. It comes from inside. So intrinsic motivation is inside. Extrinsic, as in external. Extrinsic motivation is desire to perform behavior due to promised rewards or threats of punishment. That carrot or stick, dichotomy. Hunger motivation is a funny thing because then we start talking about set point. So set point is the point at which an individual's weight thermostat, if you will, that point where they feel like they're losing weight and it's not healthy anymore, is supposedly set. And when the body falls below this weight, as it were, and it could be ounces even, the body increases its hunger level and lowers its metabolic rate so they can restore that lost weight. And this leads us to the concept of BMR, basal metabolic rate. This is the body's base rate of energy expenditure at rest. Okay, BMR, body's base rate of energy expenditure at rest. Emotion's a funny thing. So let's talk about emotions psychologically speaking. It's a response of the whole organism, okay? It's not just in your head. It's not just in your heart. It's physiological arousal. It's expressive behaviors. It's a conscious experience. Emotion is everything. And like all of the things in psychology, there's a central disagreement about emotion. Does physiological arousal precede or follow your emotional experience? Does cognition, thinking, precede emotion, feeling? So which comes first, the body or the emotion, and which comes first, the thinking or the emotion? So we got to answer that. So there's a few viewpoints that are available to us as far as emotion goes. The common sense view, which is happiness makes the heart beat, awareness precedes physiology. So we become happy, and so the heart beats more. Awareness, physiology. James Lang theory tells us that physiology precedes emotional response. So there's a stimulus, our bodies get aroused, be it fear or happiness or whatever, and then thus we experience the emotion. Cannon-Barth theory says no. Physiology and emotion are simultaneous. So the stimulus yields emotion and arousal together. Two-factor theory, which is the Schachter-Singer theory, is that physiology and cognition create an emotion. So the stimulus, be it something that scares us, makes us happy, whatever, causes a cognitive label and physical arousal simultaneously, and thus we get emotion, okay? Stress is that thing that we all worry about, and it's gonna kill you, right? So that's what they say. Stress is gonna kill you. Well, there's not entirely incorrect. Is it gonna kill you right now? Please, hopefully not. But it does do a number on your biology. So stress is any circumstance, real or perceived, that threatens a person's well-being. The physicality of stress yields an outpouring of epinephrine and norepinephrine from the inner adrenal glands, and that overstimulation of the adrenal glands can have some serious biological effects. So let's talk about stress adaptation. SEAL has gas, right? SEAL has gas. General adaptation syndrome, and it's a way to remember the general adaptation syndrome. Cellular has gas. So the alarm stage, the body prepares for attack. Resistant stage. The body uses up a ton of energy to prepare for the stressor. Exhaustion. This is what brings about health problems. So alarm, resistance, exhaustion. 3 stages. So stress can lead to health problems, and that leads to elevated blood pressure, and this can lead to coronary artery disease. And coronary heart disease, coronary artery disease, is North America's leading cause of death, still to this day. Is there any way to prevent the exhaustion stage? That's a really good question. We'll talk about that. Habitually grouchy people that are habitually stressed, tend to have poorer health outcomes. They tend to be less healthy. And chronic negative emotions have negative effect on the immune system. Now, part of the reason for this is that stress diverts energy from the immune system. Okay, so psychophysiological illness is different than hypochondriasis. Let's just start there. But psychophysiological illness is a mind-body illness. It's any stress-related physical illness, okay? Some forms of hypertension, some forms of coronary artery disease, some headache issues like migraines, okay? Those are all mind-body illnesses. These are different than hypochondriasis, on the other hand, being a hypochondriac, and that's just misinterpreting normal physical sensations as symptoms of a disease. These are people that always assume they have some sort of disease. That's hypochondriasis. So, B lymphocytes fight bacterial infections. We know this from our biology classes. T lymphocytes attack cancer cells and viruses. Macrophages ingest foreign substances. These are all different kinds of white blood cells that are part of our body's immune response. Sleep is one way, yeah. During stress, energy is mobilized away from the immune system to the various fight or flight responses, and that makes the immune system vulnerable. The more stress you're under, the less energy that is available to your immune system. That's why it can affect your health. So let's talk personality, okay? Let's get moving right along. What is personality anyway, okay? So what is this personality thing? So personality as a vocab term is an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. It's the whole person, okay? Understanding personality has been the goal of humans for generations. We've been trying to figure out people for as long as we've understood people are people. And so there's plenty of perspectives regarding personality, and yes, even Freud. We're going to go over a few of them. Psychodynamic, that's Freud. Jungian, behaviorist, social cognitive, humanistic, trait theory, and we measure it too, just for flavor. So, there we go. So let's talk about the psychodynamic theory first, because it came first before the chicken and the egg. What is personality anyway, according to Freud? Well, it's the result of the unconscious mind's influence on the conscious mind. It develops through a series of psychosexual stages, like we talked about in development. And when things don't go right, which he believed was often, the mind employs defense mechanisms to combat the stress of the wrongness. Repression, what else? Projection, things like that. If I can get my slides to move. Okay. The result of the unconscious mind influence on the conscious mind is motives and conflicts. And he talked about the iceberg model of the mind. He presented this to us. And like we said, it develops through a series of psychosexual stages. And two of the same slide, I apologize. So, the iceberg model is our id, ego, and superego. Most of it lives underneath the conscious awareness, right? Conscious awareness is mostly the ego, a little bit of superego. The preconscious is the rest of the ego pretty much, and a little bit of superego. The rest of it in the unconscious mind is where the id lives and the superego lives, and the ego has to try and figure out between them. Obviously, we have Freud's psychosexual stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We talked about those earlier. Now, when talking about psychodynamic personality, we have to understand that there are defense mechanisms, and these are just a few of them. Repression, denial, projection, displacement, regression, sublimation. These are not all of them. These are just some of the, the greatest hits. And we've all learned about them, and obviously we can talk about them later on. But yeah, it's how we kind of deal with our conflicts. So, moving away from Freud, because we like to do that, we have Carl Jung. Preconscious. The preconscious is the, okay, so we'll talk about that. Anika, thank you so much for asking. Put that in the question box. So what is personality according to Jung? Is a result of experiences that influence. And these experiences come from life and from the collective unconscious. This is the broad, shared human experience. Archetypes are universal themes that we inherit as humans from the collective unconscious. And according to Jung, it's the reason that many cultures share the same types of myths, like flood myths, end of the world myths, creation myths, things like that. It's where so the archetypes are things like mother, hero, king, gods. Those are big concepts that we get from the collective unconscious. This is also where we get the concepts of the animus and the anima. Excuse me. According to the behaviorist perspective, it's all about the behaviors for the behaviorists, and personality is no different, okay? Personality is, according to behaviorists, is the result of adaptations to the environment. It's who we are as a result of the environments we grow up in. So environment shapes our personalities. So aggressive people have had aggressive environments to adapt to, etc. According to the social cognitive theory, which we owe very much to a guy by the name of Dr. Julian Roeder, or Roeder. I've never been quite sure how to pronounce that. So social cognitive theory emphasizes cognitive processes such as thinking and judgment in development of personality. So these contribute to learned behaviors that become central to one's personality. So there is a learned aspect, there's a cognitive aspect. It's more than just behavioralism. Humanistic personality perspective is our friend Maslow again. So Maslow's humanism focuses on moving through a person's hierarchy of needs, fulfilling basic needs and working towards self-actualization and then eventually transcendence. This process shapes a person's personality. It's a very optimistic approach to understanding how people work. Trait theory is a very interesting sort of way to look at personality. And according to trait theory, personality is made up of a person's various traits. So what are traits? Habitual patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. So this focuses on, instead of on the similarities of people, it focuses on the difference between individuals instead of their similarities. So there are 3 types of traits according to Allport. Yeah, absolutely. I had no problem. So cardinal traits are our main ones that never change. Central traits are the major ones in our, it's very optimistic and very positive, so it tends to be a lot of people's favorite. Cardinal traits are the ones that never change. Central are the major ones that make up our personality, and secondary traits are the ones that are very fluid, and those make up our personality. So how do we measure personality? Obviously, there are so many different theories on how personality works. There's going to be tons of different ways to measure it. And I just gave you kind of a list. This is not all of them. These are just kind of the major ones. So objective tests like questionnaires, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, the MBTI, that's based on Jung's theories. The Neo-PIR, which is the personality inventory, that's 5-factor. Some of you have thought of it as ocean. No, you will not have to know all these different ways, Akshita. These are just different ways to do it. It kind of boils down to some are more clinical, some are more, subjective, and some are more objective. The MMPI is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Test. It is the most widely used of it, okay? This could be one that they ask you about. Sure, I'll answer that momentarily, Anya. Thank you so much for asking. In fact, let's answer that one now. So the MMPI is probably going to be the one that comes up the most because it is the one that's most widely used. It's got 338 questions in its most current iteration. It's extensive, and it's used for diagnosing personality disorders. It's kind of a big deal. The 16 personality factor, that's another important one, is based on Cattell's work, and it's used for psychiatric disorders, okay? What else? So those two, the MMPI and the 16 personality factor, probably going to be two of the ones that you talk about, but also we're going to look at Rorschach test, which is your ink blot, and also the TAT test, which is ambiguous pictures, and talk about personality and emotional functioning. Yeah, collection of conscious things is a little bit confusing. We'll talk about it, I promise. So those four are probably going to be the ones that come up the most, and the reason is because two of them are very clinical, very objective. It's not about the person, the surveyor's opinions, right? It's, you've entered this information, thus we get this result. The Rorschach test and the TAT test are far more subjective. It takes a lot of the tester's opinion when it comes to understanding things. Okay. And yeah, we'll talk about Jung's theory momentarily. Yep. So let's talk about Jung's theory. Jung. Okay. Carl Jung. So Carl Jung's a fun one. We're going to answer that question right now. So Carl Jung believed in the collective unconscious, and his theory was that as humans, obviously we have different experiences, and as cultures we have different experiences, but all humans as a species share a collective unconscious, that grand tapestry in the outer sphere that we are all connected to somehow or another. And that collective unconscious drives our mythology, it drives our archetypes, and sometimes it drives our dreams. So according to Jung, sometimes we have certain dreams because we're tapping into the collective conscious. So the reason that he thought there was a collective unconscious is because so many different cultures share mythologies, not necessarily the gods and goddesses they talk about, but the concepts. Most cultures have a flood myth. Most cultures have a creation myth. Almost all cultures have a creation myth. Many cultures have a trickster being that has to be, overcome. So that collective unconscious is where we get our archetypes of like the mother, the hero, the king, the gods. I hope that made a little bit of sense. Excuse me. Okay. All right, Akshita, thank you so much for stopping by. Let's answer a few more questions. So an example of drive reduction theory is when you're hungry. So, okay, drive reduction theory. Your body needs food. Take care, Tigas. Thank you so much for stopping by. So your body needs food, right? So because the body needs food, and you can take care, because the body needs food, the drive of hunger is presented. And to satiate that drive, to reduce that drive, we eat. So that's drive reduction. So we need food, we get hungry, we eat, we satisfy that hunger. So the way to prevent the exhaustion stage, part of that is going to be rest, relaxation, meditation, basically things that chill out your stress reaction is going to help lessen the exhaustion stage. I don't know if you can ever really prevent it, but you can lessen it. Feel good vibes, exactly. So the preconscious, if we're talking about Freudian theory, we have the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. The preconscious, that area that's just below conscious awareness, but reachable through therapy, through talk therapy, and evaluation and psychotherapy, things like that. It's what helps us tap into the unconscious. Great question, Akshita. The animus and the anima are the male and female archetypes. The animus is the male, the anima is the female, and those are the grand archetypes of the universe. That male force and female force that helps shape the world. So pretty much as it stands, that's all, folks. That's pretty much all I got. We covered a lot of material today. I know we went pretty fast. Are there any other questions before we shut this down? Well, folks, I do really appreciate your time. It's been an absolute pleasure going live with you. If you want to ever download this, you definitely can. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Let's take it away.